Well, I think the Russian government hasn't committed all its forces. It's had a slow start to the campaign. It's still approaching Kiev. I don't think it's ready to talk. I think it wants to see what it can get on the battlefield first. Its aim from the beginning has been regime change in Kiev. It's been to topple the government of Volodymyr Zelensky, install a pro-Russian government that favors Moscow, and to do so by force. And it's not going to start discussing that at the negotiating table until it sees how far it can get first, especially when it is very close to the outskirts of Kiev. Russian advances have been fairly substantial in many parts of the country. So I would be wary of assuming that we're going to see any serious diplomacy at this stage.
And Ukraine says sanctions won't stop President Putin. We just spoke to the former Prime Minister, Alexei Honcharuk, who says what Ukraine needs now is direct military support. And of course, NATO has repeatedly said it won't be sending troops in. Where else can Kiev turn to for help?
Well, no one's going to send troops to Ukraine. Let's be very clear about that. Russia, it's on its own against Russia. However, that doesn't mean there's no support it can get from the West. We probably are still seeing ongoing arms shipments to Ukraine in the west of the country. I think those are probably now occurring in secret. I don't think anyone is going to be sending arms openly to Ukraine at this time, not least because the depots or the warehouses might be struck by Russian missiles. I also think that there's probably quite a bit of intelligence being passed on to the Ukrainians. Tactical intelligence about the position of Russian forces, the state of their advance, the state of their special forces in cities like Kiev, who may be preparing to subvert the city from the inside. I would guess that Western intelligence agencies and defense forces are passing a lot of that information directly to their Ukrainian counterparts. But of course, all of that is occurring secretly because Western countries don't want to be seen to be co-belligerents. They don't want to be seen to be directly killing Russians themselves.
And Shashank, of course, it's unclear exactly how far Vladimir Putin will take this, but how far can he take it given Russia's military might compared to Ukraine's?
I think he wants to take the capital city. I think there's no doubt about it. I realize, many people doubted this. They thought that the idea of regime change in this era against a major country was off the table, but it's what he wanted. And I think he will go all the way. If he can do it by subversive, covert means in Kiev, he will. But I think ultimately he will have to send forces in, and that means armored forces into the capital. I also think he wants to take major cities like Odessa, the key port for Ukraine on the Black Sea. And I think he wants to push out the control of Russian proxies in the Donbass region in eastern Ukraine considerably further out. I don't think he necessarily wants to take all of Western Ukraine, which is a huge expanse of territory, which is probably quite anti-Russian. But the fact of the matter is, Russia's aim is to change the regime in Kiev by military means. That's what we are seeing unfold in front of our eyes. And I think that he's not going to stop until he's done it. Sanctions won't change his mind. Weapons won't change his mind. This is the Russian aim, and I think they will prosecute it to the end.
What are the possible scenarios that Ukraine is facing right now? What lies ahead for its future as a nation?
Well, the best case scenario, I think, is that they can frustrate those Russian plans, particularly around Kiev. They can hold on. They can prevent Russia from taking it and draw Russian forces into the cities where Ukrainian anti-tank weapons of the kind that have been supplied to them by the Brits, the Americans and others can exact a heavy toll on the Russian forces. But eventually, I'm afraid to say, with considerable regret, I don't think the Ukrainians can hold out indefinitely. I think the Russians have only committed a small proportion of their forces so far. We have to remember that. They operate in something called echelons, multiple layers of force. So there's a lot more firepower yet to be thrown at the Ukrainians.
And Shashank, we know that this invasion really has wider implications, with the EU really concerned about stability in the region.
Yeah, well, I mean, millions of refugees could flow to Poland, to Romania. We've seen how massive refugee flows can dislocate the politics of these places, as we saw in Europe in 2015. It's going to result in a Russia that is much closer to China, which, of course, has consequences not just for us here, but for you in your part of the world and the balance of power in the Asia-Pacific region. And I think, don't forget, Russia's a nuclear power, as Vladimir Putin reminded us yesterday morning. And although NATO does not want to fight Russians, there are very real escalation risks that may result. You could see, for example, Russia get very frustrated if NATO is supporting arms supplies to Ukrainians. We could see Russian warplanes in close proximity to Western ones. The escalation risks are real and they have to be managed, and NATO has to find a way of reinforcing its allies in the East without provoking a wider conflict which no one wants.
And you talk about the impact here in Southeast Asia as well. How do you view China's response to Russian aggression?
Well, it's been quite cautious, as you'd expect. The Chinese don't like, they've always said they value the idea of territorial integrity, the idea of one nation not taking land from another, because, of course, from their perspective, the big evil is separatism, as they see it in Taiwan and Tibet and Xinjiang. So they've been cautious. But let's not forget, a few weeks ago, we saw Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin launch what was quite a far-reaching joint statement of their intentions. And in that, the Chinese endorsed the Russian opposition to NATO expansion. That wasn't a green light for Russia's invasion, but it was a degree of political and diplomatic support that I think is very valuable to the Putin government. And I think both the Chinese recognize there's an opportunity here. If American forces are bogged down in Europe, and we just saw President Biden send another 7,000 American troops to the region yesterday, that is ultimately good for China in its own aspirations and ambitions in the Indo-Pacific.
Shashank Joshi, thanks so much for talking to us.
You're very welcome.